open your eyes, and you are cold. Not uncomfortable cold. Not the cold of a window left open or a blanket kicked off in the night. This is the cold of a building that was designed to be cold. Stone walls without plaster, reed floor mats that let the night air through from below, a single woolen cloak that serves as both blanket and clothing. And outside, the dark valley of the Eurotas River running cold from the mountains of Taygetos, which rise 8,000 feet directly to the west, and which are white with snow for 5 months of the year. The cold of Sparta is not an oversight. It is a policy. It has been a policy for 200 years since the lawgiver Lycurgus, legendary, semi-divine in the Spartan telling, possibly a real historical figure, possibly a useful fiction, devised the system you are living in and declared that softness was the enemy of everything worth being.
The city around you does not look like a city. This is the first surprise. The thing visitors from Athens or Corinth or Argos remark on when they come here and then cannot stop remarking on. Sparta has no walls. Other Greek cities are ringed with stone fortifications. Athens has the long walls running from the city to its port, a monument to paranoia and naval strategy. Sparta has nothing. Thucydides, the great Athenian historian, notes this directly and explains the Spartan reasoning. The walls of Sparta are its men. An enemy who reaches the valley of the Eurotas has already passed through the Spartan army, and if that has happened, no wall will help. And if it has not happened, if the army is intact, no wall is needed. The city's defense is the city's people, and the city's people have been optimized for defense since birth.
The geography of Sparta is not incidental to its character. It is its character. The Eurotas Valley sits between two mountain ranges. The Taygetos to the west, rising to 8,000 feet, and the Parnan range to the east, that make Laconia one of the most naturally defensible regions in Greece. No army has ever taken Sparta by direct assault. No army has ever needed to try, because reaching Sparta requires crossing mountain passes that the Spartan army controls. And the Spartan army is what it is. The mountains are the walls. The valley is the barracks. The geography selected for the civilization the geography produced.
The valley itself is fertile. The Eurotas plain produces wheat and barley and olives. And this fertility is the other key to understanding Sparta, because the fertility of the valley is what makes the Helots system economically rational. You do not need to enslave a population on unproductive land. You need to enslave them on land rich enough that their labor produces a surplus large enough to feed an entire class of people who do nothing but train to fight. The Eurotas Valley is exactly rich enough. The Helots farm it. The Spartans eat the produce and train. The system is, from a pure economic logic, elegant, and from every other angle, a horror.
The two rivers that frame the valley, the Eurotas and its tributaries, also provide the cold water that is central to Spartan training. Boys in the Agoge bathe in the Eurotas year-round. Not warm water, not heated baths, not even the relatively mild baths of the gymnasium. The cold river, in January, in the shadow of the Taygetos, at an elevation where winter mornings are genuinely bitter. The river is the first daily test. It is also, after enough years, not a test at all, but simply the way you start a day. The cold becomes neutral. This is the Agoge's deepest achievement. Not the muscles or the tactical knowledge, but the systematic neutralization of discomfort, the training of the body and the nervous system to receive what would destroy an ordinary person's morning and process it as unremarkable. The Spartan who wades into the January Eurotas and feels nothing significant is not suppressing discomfort. He has been trained out of it.
You sit up and look around. The barracks is long and low, and smells of the men sleeping on either side of you. Sweat and wool and the particular dry dust smell of straw and reed mats that have been slept on by soldiers for years. You are not a new soldier here. You are a Spartan man, perhaps 25, which means you have been in barracks since you were 7 and will remain in barracks. Sleeping here, eating here, training here until you are 30, when you will be allowed to live with your wife full-time, though you will still eat in the mess hall until you are 60. The barracks is not temporary accommodation. It is your primary address, your social world, your family of choice for the better part of your adult life.
The mess hall, the Syssitia, is the organizing institution of Spartan society, the thing that makes Sparta Sparta. Every Spartan male belongs to a Syssitia, a mess unit of approximately 15 men, eating together, training together, fighting together. You join at puberty if you are accepted, because the current members vote on admission, and a single negative vote excludes you. And you eat with this group for the next 45 years. You contribute a monthly share of food from your land allotment. Barley, wine, cheese, figs, and a cash supplement. In return, you are fed. You are part of a unit, and you are embedded in the social accountability structure that makes Spartan military cohesion legendary.
The food itself is famous for being terrible. The signature dish of the Spartan mess is melazomos, black broth, a stew made from pork boiled in its own blood with salt and vinegar. A visiting king from Pontus, according to legend, tasted it and said, "Now I understand why the Spartans do not fear death." This story is probably apocryphal. A broth probably exists. The point, that Spartan food was designed to sustain rather than to please, is real. An Athenian visiting a Spartan mess would be eating worse food than his slaves ate at home, and he would be expected to eat it without comment, because complaining about food in Sparta marks you as precisely the kind of man who would fail the Agoge, desert under fire, and die in obscurity, which in Sparta are all essentially the same category.
The relationship between the Syssitia members is the deepest bond in Spartan life, and it has a name in the sources. The philia, the friendship, that means something more specific in this context than it does in ordinary Greek usage.
In Athens, philia describes a broad range of affection between family members, between intellectual companions at the symposium, between political allies. In Sparta, the philia of the Syssitia is the specific bond of men who have trained together since puberty, who know each other's bodies and limits and fears with the intimacy of long shared physical ordeal, and who will stand shoulder to shoulder in the phalanx, each man's life depending directly on the man to his left maintaining his position. This is not romantic love. Though the ancient sources acknowledge a homoerotic dimension to the intense relationships that develop between older and younger men in the Agoge, and Sparta does not suppress this dimension, but channels it into a mentorship structure. It is something that has no clean modern equivalent. Call it the trust that forms between people who have been cold and hungry and exhausted together for a decade and know that the other person did not break.
The Syssitia is the reason the Spartan phalanx holds under pressure that breaks other phalanxes. The Theban phalanx at Leuctra holds too, because Epaminondas has made his sacred band,
300 paired warrior companions, into a similar unit of deep mutual trust. The lesson both armies teach is the same. What makes a military unit survive is not the individual courage of its members, but the specific bond between specific men who have been made, through shared experience, into something that is stronger collectively than the sum of its individual parts. The Syssitia creates that bond deliberately, systematically, over years. It is the most important institution in Sparta, and the black broth is its sacrament.
The morning begins before the sun. You are up at first light, if not earlier, because the discipline of the barracks is internalized after 20 years to the point that your body wakes itself reliably, in the cold, dark, without complaint. You will train today, as you train every day. Physical training in Sparta is not gym membership. It is the primary occupation of the Spartan citizen class. The Spartiate, the full Spartan citizen, the one who has passed the Agoge and been accepted into a Syssitia, does not farm, does not conduct trade, does not make pottery or cloth or weapons. That work is done by the perioikoi, the free non-citizens who live in the surrounding territory, and by the Helots, about whom we will talk carefully later. The Spartan citizen's job is to be a soldier, all day, every day, for 60 years.
The training regimen of adult Spartans is only partially documented. The Spartans themselves left almost no written records, being deeply suspicious of writing as a mechanism for storing information that should be carried in the body. But what the sources describe is relentless: running, wrestling, javelin throwing, discus, swimming in the cold Eurotas, formation drill with shield and spear. The Spartan phalanx, the 8-deep formation of overlapping shields that was the most formidable military unit in the ancient Greek world for 2 centuries, is not a technique you learn once and remember. It is a reflex, built by thousands of repetitions until the unit moves as a single body, each man covering the man to his left with his shield, the line advancing or holding or reforming without a word of command, because every man knows what every other man will do before he does it.
The weapons are simple by the standards of other ancient armies. A long thrusting spear, the doru, and a short stabbing sword, the xiphos, for when the spear breaks or the fighting becomes too close for its length. The shield, the aspis, is heavy, 8 to 15 pounds of wood and bronze, 3 feet across. Carrying it for hours in formation drill in the summer heat of the Peloponnese is a test of endurance that the training exists to make routine. The Spartan expression for a soldier's ultimate disgrace is to have thrown down the shield, not the spear, not the sword, but the shield, which is the instrument of unit defense, the thing that protects the man to your left as much as yourself. A Spartan mother's most famous instruction to her son is, "Come back with your shield or on it." Either you return victorious, still carrying the shield, or you return dead, being carried on it. Returning alive without the shield, having thrown it down to run, is the one outcome that is genuinely, irrevocably, permanently shameful.
There are things about this city that will confuse you if you have arrived expecting the movie version.
Sparta is not humorless. The Spartans are famous in the ancient sources for wit, a specific kind of wit, dry and economical and delivered with no change of expression, which the Greeks called laconism, from the Latin Laconia, the region Sparta sits in. When Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, sent a message to Sparta saying that if he brought his armies into Laconia, he would raze it to the ground, the Spartan response was a single word, if. When a visitor asked why the Spartan spear was shorter than the Athenian spear, a Spartan soldier replied, "Because we fight closer." The wit is not frivolous. It is the wit of people who have stripped language down to its functional minimum because excess, in words, in food, in comfort, in emotion, has been defined as the enemy. The joke is short because everything Spartan is short. The shortest version of the thing that works is the correct version.
Sparta is also, surprisingly, a city where music and dance matter. The Spartans do not party in the Athenian sense. No symposia with wine and philosophical debate and paid companions. But they sing. They sing at the mess hall. They sing on the march. Spartans advance into battle to the sound of pipes, not war cries, because a controlled advance in step is more effective than a frenzied charge, and the pipe keeps the pace steady. They dance in the religious festivals, formal dances that are also physical training, and the dances are public, and the standard of performance is taken seriously. The chorus at the religious festival is competitive, and its results are remembered. In a city that values physical excellence in everything, the excellence of a dancer or a singer is not trivially separate from the excellence of a soldier. It is the same quality, expressed differently.
And the Spartans talk, not in the way the Athenians talk, not in the rhetorical, discursive, let us examine all sides of the question style that produces Plato. The Spartan conversation is brief, direct, and usually competitive. Who can make the sharper point with fewer words? The Agora, the public gathering space, sees the Spartan citizens meeting, talking, making the collective decisions that their unusual government requires. Sparta is not a monarchy in the simple sense. It has two kings simultaneously, a hereditary arrangement so strange that scholars are still debating its origins. Constrained by a council of elders, the Gerusha, 28 men over 60 elected for life, and an assembly of all Spartan citizens, the Apella, whose voting mechanism is oral. They shout, and the side that shouts louder wins. Spartans decide things by volume. This is not a metaphor.
But none of what you know about yourself, none of the reflexes, none of the cold tolerance, none of the formation drilling, none of the laconic wit, came for free. It was built deliberately, systematically, over 13 years of a process that has no equivalent in any other ancient civilization.
Before the Agoge begins, there is the inspection.
A Spartan child born to a Spartiate father is not automatically a Spartan citizen. Within days of birth, the father carries the infant to the elders of his tribe. The tribal elders, not a physician, not a government official, for examination. The elders look at the child. They assess its physical constitution. If the child appears strong, they return it to the father to be raised as a Spartan citizen. If it appears weak or deformed, it is exposed, left on the slopes of Mount Apothetas outside the city, to die of exposure or to be found and raised by whoever finds it, often by perioikoi or helots, which means the child lives but outside the citizen class. The decision is collective, fast, and final.
The sources that describe this practice, primarily Plutarch, writing 600 years after Lycurgus in a biography that is part history and part idealization, present it without the horror that a modern reader brings to it, because the moral framework is different. Sparta is not raising children. It is maintaining a military force. Every Spartan citizen is a soldier, and every soldier must be capable of the physical demands the army places on them. A Spartan who cannot march 20 miles in armor, who cannot hold a shield for 4 hours, who cannot survive a mountain winter,
That Spartan is a liability in the phalanx, a gap in the line that will get the man to his left killed. The inspection is not cruelty for its own sake. It is the coldest form of military logistics applied to the most basic human moment.
If you survive the inspection, and most do, because Sparta is not a small city, it has a citizen population of several thousand, and the rate of exposure is not accurately documented. You spend 7 years at home with your mother. The Spartan mother's role in these 7 years is significant and not what people expect. She does not raise a soft child. The Spartan mother deliberately builds hardiness into the early years, not wrapping the child against cold, not rushing to comfort every cry, habituating the child's body and nervous system to discomfort early. Because at 7, the child goes to the Agoge, and what happens at the Agoge requires preparation.
The Agoge, the upbringing, the raising, begins at age 7 and lasts until 20. It is a state-run boarding school, total institution experience. The boys live together, eat together, train together, sleep together on reed mats in unheated dormitories, and are overseen by older boys and adult supervisors. You leave your family. You do not go home for visits. You see your parents at public festivals, at a distance, and the expectation is that you will not display any particular reaction to seeing them, because emotional display is weakness. And weakness is the thing the Agoge exists to eliminate.
The physical training begins immediately and escalates continuously. Running, wrestling, fighting. Not the controlled wrestling of the gymnasium, but rough, competitive fighting with a high tolerance for injury. Swimming in the Eurotas. Endurance marches. Going barefoot year-round because shoes are a softness that the feet do not need. Going underfed. Deliberately, systematically underfed because hungry boys learn to forage, to steal food from the surrounding farms and estates. And in learning to steal, they learn stealth, initiative, self-sufficiency, and the management of need that a soldier on campaign will require. Being caught stealing, however, is punished severely. Not for the stealing, but for the failure of stealth. The lesson is not, do not steal. The lesson is, do not get caught.
The intellectual content of the Agoge is the thing most commonly underestimated, and the misunderstanding runs deep. The Hollywood Spartan is a muscled body with nothing behind the eyes, and the historical Spartan is something considerably more interesting.
The Agoge teaches reading and writing, not at the depth of the Athenian education, which produces philosophers and playwrights, but as functional tools. The boys learn to read because a soldier on campaign needs to read dispatches, maps, and orders. They learn poetry, specifically the poetry of Tyrtaeus, the Spartan war poet whose elegies on courage and the duty of the citizen soldier were memorized and recited in the Agoge for centuries. The poetry is not entertainment. It is doctrine delivered in a form the memory can hold under stress. When you are standing in the phalanx at Thermopylae, and the arrows are falling, and the man to your left has just gone down, the words that come to you unbidden are Tyrtaeus's, because you have been repeating them since you were 8, and they are now part of the architecture of your mind.
The debates and discussions that form part of the Agoge curriculum are another surprise. The boys are presented with questions and required to answer them briefly, directly, and well. The laconic tradition applied to the education of children. Why does a soldier not run? Answer in 5 words or fewer. What is the highest virtue? Answer without hesitation. The brevity is not anti-intellectual. It is a different discipline than the Athenian one, less interested in exploring all possibilities, and more interested in knowing, with absolute certainty, the thing you would do in each situation before the situation arrives. The Spartan answer to a crisis is not improvised. It is retrieved. It has been decided in advance and stored where panic cannot reach it.
Socrates, the Athenian philosopher who will be executed by Athens for asking too many questions, is on record admiring Sparta, not uncritically, but admiring the coherence of it, the way the society holds together, the way every element supports every other element. He sees in Sparta a kind of achieved answer to the question that Athens perpetually debates: what should a human being be? The Spartan answer is specific, consistent, and enforced. The Athenian answer is rich, complicated, and perpetually contested. Both are responses to the same question, and neither fully works.
There is a ritual at the heart of the Agoge that has no equivalent anywhere in the ancient world: the public flogging at the altar of Artemis Orthia.
The sanctuary of Artemis Orthia sits at the edge of Sparta, beside the Eurotas, and it is the site of one of the Agoge's most documented and most debated rituals. Boys competing in the sanctuary steal cheeses from the altar, an echo, the mythological framework says, of an ancient test, while older youths whip them. The point is not the cheese. The point is endurance. The boy who steals the most cheese while being whipped without crying out is the victor. The ritual is public. Spectators attend. By the Roman period, the ritual has become a tourist attraction. The Roman author Cicero mentions attending. And by late antiquity, the theater built around the sanctuary to accommodate spectators seats thousands.
Modern scholars debate what the ritual actually tests and what it teaches. The obvious reading, endurance of pain, is probably right, but incomplete. The ritual also tests composure under public observation. The boy is not just enduring pain, he is performing endurance in front of a crowd without the mask of privacy. The courage that matters in the phalanx is public courage. The courage to hold your position when the man next to you has fallen and 5,000 people can see whether you break. The altar ritual is practice for that specific demand, not just the tolerance of pain, but the maintenance of dignity under pain in front of witnesses. The witnesses are the point. The boy who keeps his face still while being flogged in front of the community has practiced the thing the phalanx will require, in miniature, in controlled conditions, before the spears come.
The question of what the Spartans actually believed. Underneath the system, inside the silence, is one of the most interesting historical puzzles the ancient world offers.
The Spartans do not write philosophy. The Athenians write philosophy. The Spartans produce it by being the thing the Athenians philosophize about. But the laconic sayings that survive, collected by Plutarch, attributed to Spartan kings and warriors and women, form a kind of anti-philosophy, short compressed statements about what matters, what is real, what survives the stripping away of everything unnecessary. There is a Spartan king who, when asked why Sparta had no walls, said, "The city is well fortified that has a wall of men rather than brick." There is a Spartan ambassador in a foreign court who offered a place of honor, said, "Honor has no place. Honor is made." There is a Spartan general, asked before a battle whether he was afraid, who said, "Yes, but not yet."
These sayings, even if polished by later retelling, point to something real in the Spartan mental world. A belief that reality is revealed by stripping away, not by adding. that the unnecessary is not merely comfortable but actually obscuring, that the person you are under pressure is your actual person, and the project of the Agoge is to find out who that person is early enough to be useful. The Spartan system is not anti-intellectual. It is a different kind of intellectual discipline. Not the Athenian project of building elaborate structures of thought, but the Spartan project of reducing everything to what holds under pressure.
Whether this is philosophy or its opposite is a debate that has been running for 2,500 years, which is itself a kind of tribute to the Spartan system. It produced a way of being in the world that the world has been unable to stop thinking about.
The year the Agoge turns 15 is the year the boys become Aarons, the oldest class of students, now responsible for training the younger cohorts. This transition is the Agoge's most psychologically sophisticated element, and it produces the effect the system intends with remarkable efficiency.
The Ewan commands the boys in his charge. He sets their training, their discipline, their punishments. He is accountable, in public, for their performance. If they do poorly at a public festival, if they show weakness or cowardice, the Aaron is blamed and punished alongside them. The accountability runs upward. The senior boy's failure is the Aaron's failure, and the Aaron's failure is visible in front of the community, at the festivals where the performances are judged. The structure creates investment. The Aaron is not a guard, he is a stakeholder, personally invested in the development of the boys he commands, because their development is his reputation.
It also creates, over the 3 years of the Aaron's tenure, a living archive of the Agoge's values. Every method the Aarons use was used on them. Every technique of endurance building and shame management and courage cultivation was tested on their bodies first. They teach what worked, discard what failed, and add refinements drawn from their own experience of what breaks a person and what builds one. The Agoge is not a curriculum in the modern sense, a document, a syllabus, a policy. It is a practice transmitted body to body, generation to generation, refined by each cohort's lived experience. Its persistence across 3 centuries is not the persistence of a written tradition, but the persistence of a physical one, embedded in the nervous systems of people who received it and reproduced it in turn.
At 18, the Agoge's most notorious element begins, the cryptia.
The cryptia is what the sources describe as a kind of secret police operation against the Helot population, the enslaved agricultural workers who outnumber the Spartans roughly 7 to 1, and whose labor makes the entire Spartan system possible. Young men, at the end of the Agoge, are sent out into the countryside, alone, with a knife and minimal supplies, for a period of perhaps a year. Their mission, to operate in the dark, to survive by their own resources, and, according to the most disturbing accounts, to kill Helots, specifically strong or capable-seeming ones, who might become leaders of resistance. The killing was done at night, covertly, leaving no body that could be attributed to a specific Spartan. The cryptia is the darkest documented element of the Spartan system, and it is where the question of how to evaluate Sparta becomes impossible to avoid. A civilization that sends its young men out to murder enslaved people as a military training exercise is doing something that cannot be laundered by pointing at the diet, or the discipline, or the poetry of Xerxes. The Helots are the necessary substrate of everything Sparta achieves, and the terror directed at them is not incidental. It is the maintenance of a system of exploitation so total that the Spartans declare war on the Helots formally each year, a ritual declaration, renewed annually, so that killing them is technically not murder.
We will come back to the Helots. They deserve their own chapter, and they will get one.
There is a woman running through the Agora.
Not hurrying between errands, not escorted by a male relative, eyes down, wrapped in the kind of modest clothing that Athenian women wear as a near-universal social obligation. Running, in public, in athletic dress. And no one is looking at her the way a crowd would look in Athens, because in Sparta, this is not remarkable. In Sparta, the women train.
The Spartan woman is the most misrepresented figure in the popular imagination of the ancient world, misrepresented in two directions simultaneously. On one side, the romantic version, the warrior goddess, fully equal to men, fearless and powerful. On the other side, the dismissive version, a breeder of soldiers, her liberation a function of her reproductive utility to the state. The truth is more specific, more interesting, and more uncomfortable than either.
Begin with the physical. Spartan girls train, not as intensively as the boys in the Agoge, not in the same institutional setting, but formally, publicly, in organized athletic competition. Running, wrestling, javelin, discus. The competitions are public, and the girls compete in front of mixed audiences, which would be scandalous in Athens, where respectable women's public presence was severely restricted. Plutarch, describing the Spartan system, notes that this physical training had a practical purpose in the Spartan understanding. A strong mother produces stronger children. The reasoning is eugenic in the technical sense and wrong in the biological sense. But the practice produces something the reasoning does not quite account for. Women who are physically capable, confident in their bodies, accustomed to public competition, and entirely unwilling to be decorative.
Compare her to her Athenian contemporary, because the contrast is what makes both figures legible.
The Athenian woman of the citizen class, the wife of the men who are inventing democracy and philosophy and drama 50 miles away in Athens, lives in the Genkonitis, the women's quarters of the house, separated from the male social spaces, where she manages the household, supervises the slaves, weaves and raises children. She goes out for religious festivals, for funerals, possibly to a neighbor's house, always accompanied, always dressed to minimize attention. She does not attend the theater, the symposium, the assembly, the law courts. She does not own property in her own name. She cannot enter into legal contracts. She is a permanent minor in legal terms, under the guardianship of her father or husband, or, if both are dead, a male relative appointed by the state. The Athenian woman's world is the inside of a house, and the house is her husband's.
The Spartan woman walks through the Agora alone. She owns land, because Spartan women can and do inherit property, and by the time Aristotle is writing his critical analysis of the Spartan constitution in the 4th century BC, he estimates that women own approximately 2/5 of all land in Laconia. She manages the estate when her husband is at war or in the barracks, which is most of the time, because someone has to, and the system has selected for competence by refusing to give her the option of incompetence. She enters into transactions, negotiates terms, runs the agricultural operation that supports the family's Syssitia contribution. She is not doing this with a male guardian's supervision because there is no male guardian available. He is drilling with the phalanx.
The Spartan wife's domestic authority is, in practical terms, considerably wider than the Athenian wife's. And her freedom of movement, her ability to be in public space without escort, without particular social scrutiny, is remarkable in the ancient Greek context. She is not free in any modern sense. She is subject to the same Spartan system as the men, just along different tracks. But she is free in the sense that matters most in her world. She is not locked in a room.
The Spartan woman speaks, and when she speaks, the sources record her words with an admiring horror that tells you something about the impact. The laconic tradition is not male only. Spartan women are documented saying things that Athenian women would not say in public and probably would not say at home. The famous stories cluster around military departures and returns. The mother who hands her son his shield and says, "Come back with it or on it." The mother who, hearing that her son died in battle, says, "I bore him to die for Sparta, and he did." The widow who, hearing that her husband died facing the enemy, says, "He was worthy of me then." These stories are probably partly legendary, collected and polished by later writers who found them useful as illustrations of Spartan values. But they are numerous enough and consistent enough in their character to reflect something real about what Spartan women were trained to say, what they were expected to feel, and what the culture rewarded.
The rewarded feeling is not grief. It is pride. Pride that holds under loss, that frames death as achievement rather than catastrophe, that calibrates the emotional response to serve the military culture rather than resist it. You can read this as genuine cultural value, as a belief system that makes the unbearable bearable by giving it meaning. You can also read it as what it is: a society that has trained its women, as thoroughly as it has trained its men, to produce soldiers and then release them without resistance. The woman who does not weep when her son dies in battle is not naturally stoic. She has been educated into stoicism in the same systematic way her son has been educated into courage. The product is formidable, and the cost is the same as all Spartan costs: softness, tenderness, and the ordinary human permissions that other cultures allow their people, and Sparta does not.
There is one institution in Sparta that has no parallel anywhere in the ancient Greek world, and that the Athenians find both fascinating and scandalous: the public dinner for women.
Spartan women eat communally, not in the Syssitia with the men, but in their own organized dining groups, with a similar structure of contribution and membership. This is extraordinary. Greek women eat in the home. Greek women serve food to men at dinner parties and then retreat. In Athens, the women eating together in a formal institution, with wine, with shared food, with social accountability to the group. This is the description of the symposium, the men's drinking party, the highest form of Athenian social life. In Sparta, women do a version of it too, and no one considers this revolutionary because it emerged from the logic of the same system that produces everything Spartan. If the men are in the barracks and the households need to function and the social fabric needs to hold, then the women need their own institutional structure to hold them together. The communal dining is not feminism. It is logistics. But its effects on the women who participate in it, the solidarity, the shared identity, the social practice of eating and talking with peers in a structured setting, are not reducible to logistics. Sparta's religious life is another area where the city surprises visitors expecting austerity everywhere.
The Spartans are intensely pious, more so in practice than the famously philosophical Athenians. They consult oracles before every major military campaign. They delay the beginning of campaigns to observe religious festivals. They are perhaps the only Greek army that will march away from a battle rather than fight on a sacred day. At Plataea in 479 BC, the decisive land battle of the Persian Wars, the Spartan king Pausanias stood his ground under Persian archery while his seer performed the sacrifice, waiting for favorable omens, because moving before the omens cleared would have been impiety, and impiety was not an option the Spartan army recognized.
The great festival of Sparta is the Carneia, a 9-day festival in late summer honoring Apollo, during which warfare is forbidden and which the entire Spartan citizen body observes with a seriousness that costs them strategically in almost every major conflict. It was the Carneia that prevented the full Spartan army from reaching Marathon in 490 BC. The Athenians fought Persia without them and won. It was the Carneia that limited Leonidas to his 300 at Thermopylae. The main army could not march during the festival. The Spartans knew this cost. They paid it anyway. Their piety is not merely cultural decoration. It is a constraint they accept on their military power, which says something about the depth of the constraint.
The Spartan marriage is unlike any other marriage in the Greek world, and the difference reveals the system's priorities more clearly than almost anything else.
A Spartan man marries. The state encourages marriage and penalizes men who do not marry, or who marry late, or whose wives do not produce children. But he does not live with his wife. Not fully, not for most of his active military years. He visits her at night, in secret, returning to barracks before dawn. The relationship is covert not because it is shameful, but because it is personal, and personal attachment. Visible, domestic, continuous, is the thing the Syssitia exists to replace. The man whose primary loyalty is to his wife and household is a man whose primary loyalty is not to his unit. The Spartan system needs the unit to be primary, and it achieves this by making the marriage clandestine.
The result, paradoxically, is a marriage of greater psychological equality than any other Greek institution produces. The man and woman meet as adults who manage their own domains. He in the barracks, she on the estate, and their relationship is not the relationship of owner and dependent, but something more like two competent people meeting in the dark, both of whom have significant things to do in the morning. The Spartan wife's authority over the household is real because it has to be real. The husband is not there to second-guess it.
Aristotle finds all of this alarming. He devotes significant space in the politics to criticizing Spartan women, their freedom, their property ownership, their public presence, as evidence of a constitutional failure, a loss of masculine discipline over the domestic sphere that, in his analysis, contributes to Sparta's eventual decline. He may be right about the correlation. He is certainly right that Spartan women are more powerful, by the measures available to ancient Greek women, than women anywhere else in the classical world. What he cannot acknowledge, being Aristotle, is that this power emerges not from Sparta's failures, but from its most fundamental commitments, and that the commitments produce consequences the system did not fully intend.
Everything you have seen in Sparta, the barracks, the Agoge, the training, the women's freedom, the communal meals, the laconic wit, the spare elegance of everything, rests on a foundation that no Spartan will discuss with a foreigner, and that every Spartan thinks about every day.
The Helots. The word is ancient and its etymology is debated. It may come from the city of Helos on the Laconian coast, whose population was one of the original groups enslaved by Sparta in the 9th or 8th century BC. But what it describes is specific and brutal. A population of Greeks speaking Greek, who were conquered by other Greeks and reduced to a hereditary serfdom so total that it made the slavery of Athens and Rome look almost gentle by comparison.
The Helots are not individual slaves bought in a market from distant lands. They are a people, the original Laconian and Messenian populations who lived in this valley before the Spartans did, who were defeated in military conquest, stripped of their land and their civic status, and bound permanently to the land they once owned, required to farm it for the Spartan families who now claim it, required to hand over a fixed proportion of their harvest, roughly half, to their Spartan masters,
required to serve in military campaigns as support personnel, porters, and occasionally light infantry, and required to bear this condition without legal recourse, without the ability to leave, without protection from violence, and without the theoretical path to freedom that Roman slavery occasionally offered.
The numbers are the most important fact about the Helots, because the numbers explain everything else about Sparta.
At the height of Spartan power, in the 5th century BC, the Helot population outnumbers the Spartan citizen population by approximately 7 to 1. In some periods, the ratio is estimated as high as 10 to 1. There are perhaps 8,000 Spartan citizens, the Spartiates, the full warrior citizens who have passed the Agoge, governing, exploiting, and terrifying a Helot population of perhaps 200,000 or more. Every system you have seen in Sparta, the Cryptia, the annual declaration of war against the Helots, the deliberate terror, the restriction of Spartan citizens to military service so they are always armed and trained and available, is, at its root, a response to this ratio. The Spartan military machine is not primarily designed to fight Persia or Athens. It is designed to hold down the Helots.
Thucydides, the historian, writes that most Spartan institutions were designed with the Helots in mind. He is not being polemical. He is being accurate. The Syssitia keeps Spartan men eating together and armed together because a man who goes home to his farm at the end of the day is less available for rapid mobilization in the event of a Helot revolt. And Helot revolts are not hypothetical. The great earthquake of 464 BC triggers the largest Helot uprising in Spartan history, a rebellion that lasts for years and that Sparta, weakened by the earthquake's casualties, cannot fully suppress without Athenian military assistance. The memory of that uprising, and the constant awareness that it could happen again, runs through every Spartan institution like a fault line that everyone can feel but no one will name.
The Helot life is documented poorly, as the life of the enslaved always is, because the enslaved do not write the histories. But what emerges from the scattered references is a picture of managed humiliation designed to make resistance psychologically as well as militarily difficult.
Helots are required to wear a specific cap, the dogskin cap, and a specific garment that marks their status visually, so that no Helot can move through the Laconian countryside without their condition being immediately identifiable. They are required to sing degrading songs and to perform degrading dances at Spartan festivals, not as performers, but as spectacles of subjection. They are given a specific amount of wine at the Spartan festivals, more than they would normally drink, so that drunken Helots can be displayed to the young men of the Agoge as examples of what not to become. The anti-education, the instruction through negative example. The Spartan boys are taught what to avoid by watching the people they own being humiliated.
And yet the Helots resist. They resist continuously in small ways and occasionally in large ones. They preserve their own culture, their own Messenian identity, their songs that are not the degrading festival songs. Their memory of a time when this land was theirs, when the Athenians established the outpost of Pylos on the Messenian coast during the Peloponnesian War, a deliberate provocation, a beacon for Helot defectors. Helots go to it, not all of them, not most of them, but enough to demonstrate that the loyalty the Spartan system claimed to produce
was compliance produced by terror rather than consent, produced by affection.
The Helot, who is most famous in the ancient sources, is Eurystheus. But he is famous because he does not exist as an individual, but as a category. Because the Helots are almost never named in the Greek literary tradition. Because namelessness is one of the tools of subjection. Because a person without a recorded name is easier to keep in the category of property rather than person. The Helots who die in Spartan service, who farm the land that feeds the Syssitia, whose labor makes the Agoge possible by freeing every Spartan male from every economic obligation. They are the foundation of the most admired military society in Greek history, and their names are not in the record.
One more institution of the Helot system deserves attention, because it reveals the psychological sophistication of the Spartan control apparatus, the institution of the Helot who exceeds.
The crypta's most documented function, the killing of capable Helots, is not random. It is targeted. The specific Helots identified for elimination are those who have demonstrated leadership, intelligence, organizational capacity, or unusual strength. The people who, in a freer society, would become community leaders, warriors, administrators. The selection principle is not cruelty for its own sake. It is the systematic removal of the individuals most likely to make a Helot revolt succeed.
The effect on Helot culture over generations is not hard to imagine. Communities that lose their capable people, reliably, repeatedly, whenever those people become visible, develop strategies of concealment, of deliberate moderation of visible achievement, of not being the one who stands out. The talent goes underground, or it leaves, or it is killed. The remaining community is not stupid or passive. It is a community that has learned that visibility is lethal and invisibility is survival. This is the deepest form of social control, not the direct suppression of resistance, but the removal of the conditions that make organized resistance possible.
And yet the Helots maintain identity. They maintain culture. They maintain the memory of Messenia, the land to the west that the Spartans conquered in the 8th and 7th centuries BC, whose people became the bulk of the Helot population. When the Athenian general Demosthenes establishes the fort at Pylos in 425 BC, and Helots begin defecting to it, they are not defecting to Athens. They are defecting to the possibility of Messenia restored. The identity has survived 2 centuries of the Cryptia. In 370 BC, when the Theban general Epaminondas invades Laconia after Leuctra and marches to the borders of Sparta itself, he gives the Messenian Helots something the Cryptia could not take away: Messenia. He restores their land, rebuilds their city of Messene, and declares them free. The city they build at Messene, with walls, real walls, unlike Sparta, walls so massive that they still stand today, is built by people who had been forbidden to build anything for 200 years, and they built it in 85 days.
There is a deal that Sparta makes with itself, and the deal is the key to understanding everything.
The deal goes like this. We will accept absolute constraint on ourselves. Our diet, our comfort, our family life, our economic ambition, our freedom to move, our freedom to choose a different life, in exchange for the certainty of power over others. The Spartan citizen gives up softness, individuality, privacy, and the pursuit of personal happiness in any of the forms other Greek cities permit. He sleeps in barracks, eats black broth, leaves his wife to run the farm, and trains to kill.
What he gets in return is membership in the most formidable military fraternity in the ancient world, and the guarantee that the 200,000 people who farm his land and carry his water will not today rise up and kill him in his sleep. Because the crypt Aya went out last night, and the annual declaration of war has been renewed, and the fear is maintained.
It is an extraordinary trade, and it holds for 3 centuries, which is itself remarkable, because most political systems with that level of internal strain do not hold for 3 centuries. The system holds because the constraint is universal, and the alternative is always visible. The Helots, the reminder of what happens to the defeated. The Spartan citizen is not free, but the person who is less free than the Spartan citizen is standing in front of him with a dogskin cap, and the comparison makes the arrangement bearable.
The Spartan relationship with Athens is the defining drama of the classical Greek world, and it is impossible to understand either city without the other.
Athens and Sparta are not merely rivals, they are mirrors, each reflecting what the other chose not to be. Athens chose the individual over the collective, freedom of inquiry over trained certainty, walls over men, the navy over the phalanx, trade over agriculture, writing over memory, art over discipline. Everything Athens is, Sparta is not. Everything Sparta is, Athens is not. And for the century of Greek greatness, from the Persian wars to the end of the Peloponnesian War, the 2 cities define the poles between which every other Greek city-state has to position itself.
The Athenian philosopher Plato, who spent much of his career designing ideal states, cannot decide whether to be appalled by Sparta or to admire it. His Republic, the blueprint for a perfectly just city, borrows from Sparta the communal education, the suppression of private property among the guardian class, the emphasis on physical training, the subordination of individual desire to collective need. He does not borrow the Helots. He does not borrow the Crypteia. He takes the architecture of Spartan social control and imagines it without the exploitation that makes it function. He is not the last person to attempt this. He is not the last to fail at it for the same reasons.
The Peloponnesian War. 27 years, 431 to 404 BC. The conflict that destroyed the Athenian Empire and exhausted the Greek world, is the story of these 2 mirrors at war. Athens wins every naval engagement for years. Sparta wins every land engagement. Athens besieges Syracuse and loses its fleet and its army in a catastrophe from which it never fully recovers. Sparta, with Persian financial support, builds a navy and wins at Agoge in 405 BC, blockades the Piraeus, and forces Athens to tear down the long walls. The city that built democracy surrenders to the city that had no walls. History is not a morality play.
The Perioikoi, the free people who live around Sparta, are the system's invisible middle layer, and they deserve at least a paragraph. The Perioikoi are free Greeks, living in settlements throughout Laconia and Messenia, who are neither Spartiates nor Helots. They have their own local self-government, their own laws, their own civic lives. They pay no tribute to Sparta. They serve in the Spartan army when called, and they fight well because they are trained and they have reasons of their own for maintaining the Spartan system that protects them from the Helots and the outside world. What they do not have is a voice in Spartan foreign policy or Spartan law. They are autonomous within their own communities and entirely excluded from the state that defines their external conditions. The Perioikoi are the artisans of the Spartan world, the blacksmiths, the potters, the weavers, the shipbuilders,
When you see a Spartan warrior's armor, it was made by perioikoi hands. When you eat from the pottery in the mess hall, perioikoi made it. The Spartan citizen does not make things. The Spartan citizen trains to kill and fights when called. And everything material that sustains that training and that life is produced by people who are free, but not citizens, present, but not counted. The perioikoi are the unnamed infrastructure of a system that remembers only the warriors.
Thermopylae is 3 years away from this morning, and then it comes.
The Battle of Thermopylae, 480 BC, the narrow coastal pass where the Persian army of Xerxes and a Greek allied force led by the Spartan king Leonidas met for 3 days, is so famous that it has become a metaphor, and the metaphor has obscured the reality. The reality is this: 300 Spartans, with several thousand Greek allies, held a pass perhaps 50 feet wide against an army estimated conservatively at 100,000 for 2 days. And on the 3rd day, after a traitor showed Xerxes a mountain path that flanked the position, Leonidas sent most of the allied Greeks away and stayed with his 300 and died.
Why he stayed is debated. The Spartan oracle had told the city that either Sparta would be destroyed or its king would die. Leonidas may have believed his death was the necessary sacrifice. The rearguard action bought time for the Greek fleet, for the eventual resistance, for the Greek victory at Salamis that stopped the Persian invasion. Whether Leonidas knew this, whether he stayed for strategic reasons or religious ones, or simply because Spartan law did not give him permission to leave, we do not know.
What we know is that the epitaph written for the Spartans who died there, attributed to the poet Simonides, is the most famous military inscription in Western history. Go, stranger, and tell the Lacedaemonians that we lie here, obedient to their commands.
Obedient to their commands. Not glorious, not heroic, not chosen, obedient. The epitaph is Spartan, stripped down, laconic, containing everything in the plainest possible words. They died because their law told them to stay, and their law was inside them, and the inside of them was made in the Agoge. Over 13 years of cold mornings and black broth and reed mats, and the instruction of Tyrtaeus. And the instruction was complete.
There is one final institution that completes the picture of Sparta's internal architecture: the ephors.
The ephors. 5 of them elected annually by the assembly, serving for a single year that cannot be repeated, are the most powerful officials in the Spartan state, and they are its strangest. They can veto decisions by the 2 kings. They can arrest the kings. They have arrested kings, put them on trial, exiled them, executed them. They supervise the Agoge. They authorize the Crypteia. They receive foreign ambassadors. They accompany the army on campaign and can relieve a general of command. For a single year, 5 ordinary Spartan citizens hold the power to override the hereditary royal houses that trace their lineage to Heracles. The ephor system is Sparta's safety valve, the mechanism by which a military monarchy prevents the accumulation of tyrannical power in a single royal line. It is also in its way the most democratic element of the Spartan constitution. Any Spartan citizen can become an ephor, and the shout vote of the assembly that elects them makes the process as rough as any populist institution ever devised. The Spartans did not call their system democracy. That word was Athenian. But they had developed, centuries before Athens, a mechanism for constraining hereditary power through annual accountability to the citizen body. It is one of the more surprising things you find in the city that built the Crypteia.
The city declines slowly, and then quickly.
The Spartan citizen population, always smaller than the system could safely sustain, shrinks after Thermopylae, after the Persian Wars, after the devastating earthquake of 464 BC, after the long grinding attrition of the Peloponnesian War against Athens. By the 4th century BC, there are perhaps 2,000 Spartiates where once there were 8,000. The Agoge continues. The Syssitia continues. The Crypteia continues. But the demographic math is turning against the system. The pool of warriors is shrinking while the Helot population remains stable, and the ratio that was already terrifying at 7-1 is becoming something worse.
In 371 BC, at the Battle of Leuctra, the Spartan phalanx meets the Theban sacred band under Epaminondas and is destroyed. Not defeated, destroyed. The sacred band has developed a new formation, the oblique phalanx, that concentrates overwhelming force on a single point of the enemy line. And the point it chooses is the Spartan left, where the best Spartan warriors stand. And the best Spartan warriors die. And 400 Spartans are killed in a single afternoon, which is a number the city cannot replace.
After Leuctra, Sparta is not destroyed. It persists. It continues to exist, to maintain its institutions, to produce its particular culture, for centuries more, through the Macedonian period, through the Roman period, into the Byzantine era, when a descendant community in the mountains of the Taygetos called themselves Laconians and spoke a dialect they traced to ancient Sparta. But the Spartan hegemony, the dominance, the 2 centuries of being the most formidable military power in the Greek world, ends at Leuctra, in an afternoon, in a field in Boeotia, when the phalanx breaks.
Before the lights go out, one more Spartan figure deserves her moment. Gorgo, daughter of King Cleomenes, wife of King Leonidas, and one of the few Spartan women whose name and words survive in the historical record.
Gorgo appears in Herodotus, the great historian of the Persian Wars, at 2 moments that have made her one of the most vivid personalities in the ancient sources. The first. As a child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, she is present when a foreign emissary comes to her father with a bribe, urging him to take a political position favorable to a foreign power. The child watches for a while, then says to her father, "Father, the stranger will corrupt you unless you send him away. Cleomane sends the emissary away." Herodotus reports this without commentary, as a fact worth recording, which is its own kind of commentary. The daughter of a Spartan king intervened in a diplomatic negotiation as a child, and her intervention was correct, and her father listened.
The second moment. Herodotus records that a message came to Sparta from the exiled Spartan king Demaratus, warning of Xerxes' invasion plan. The message was written on wooden tablets coated in wax, blank apparently, until Gorgo suggested that the wax be scraped off. Under the wax was the writing. She had seen what the others had not seen, or had been willing to say what the others had not been willing to say. The warning reached Sparta. The preparations began.
These 2 moments, a girl interrupting diplomacy to protect her father, a woman solving a puzzle that the men around her missed, are small, and they are probably polished by later retelling. And they are also exactly what you would expect from a culture that trained its women to be competent, direct, and unafraid of being visible. Gorgo is the Spartan system's argument for itself. Here is what you get when you refuse to lock the women away. Here is what you lose when you do not.
The Spartan legacy in the Western imagination is one of the strangest stories in the history of ideas. A civilization that fell 1,500 years ago and is still being argued about, still being imitated, still being used to make points about masculinity and discipline and freedom that its original practitioners would not recognize.
Every authoritarian movement in modern European history has found something in Sparta to admire. The discipline, the collective subordination of individual to state, the physical culture, the contempt for weakness. This is worth noting because it is not an accident. Sparta genuinely produced those things, and genuinely believed in them, and genuinely achieved remarkable things through them. The admiration is not irrational, which is what makes it dangerous. The admirers tend to take the Agoge without the black broth, the phalanx without the crypteia, the laconic wit without the Helots. They take the aesthetics of Spartan discipline and leave the mechanism of Spartan terror. The mechanism is the thing that cannot be separated from the aesthetics. And the history of those who tried is not instructive.
But Sparta's legacy is also the legacy of the women who owned land when no other Greek women did. The legacy of the Syssitia and the trust it built. The legacy of Thermopylae and the idea, not unique to Sparta but expressed by Sparta with unsurpassed economy, that there are things worth dying for, and that the knowledge of what they are should be settled before the situation arises. These things are also Sparta, and they are also real, and they have also entered the world and will not leave it.
You have been awake since before dawn. The cold of the barracks has given way to the cold of the training ground, and the cold of the Eurotas, and the cold of the mess hall, where the black broth is placed in front of you without ceremony, and you eat it without complaint. The day has been what all days are in Sparta, physical, demanding, stripped of the softnesses that other cities permit, and that you have, over the course of the Agoge, genuinely stopped missing.
Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after. Until you are 60, when the obligation of the Syssitia finally releases you, and you can go home to a house that your wife has been managing for decades, with a competence you did not need to verify, because the system selected for it. And you will sit in your own house, in the valley of the Eurotas, with the Taygetos mountains white above you, and you will eat food that is not black broth, and whether you will feel anything about that, relief or loss, or the peculiar emptiness of a person who has been defined entirely by a system and does not know what they are without it, the sources do not say.
The sources never ask Spartans what they feel, and the Spartans, being Spartan, would not have answered if they had.
The reed mats are cold. The cloak is thin. The drum on the training ground will beat before the sun.
Close your eyes. You are in Sparta tonight, and the cold is the point, and morning is always coming.
Sleep well.